Hi, I'm Krutika, and today's episode is with Nikki. Nikki is a chartered accountant, a chartered tax expert, a qualified fitness instructor, mom to a toddler, and now a business owner. Wow, those are quite the achievements. However, having worked her way up the corporate ladder at one of the big four accountancy practices, the decision to leave that all behind to focus on something that truly brings her joy, purpose, and flexibility is the journey she's embarking on now. From keeping a diary since 1998, recognizing the power in reflection and introspection, Nikki is embracing curiosity and finding the excitement in starting all over. There's so much to commend here with Nikki's approach to learning and life, and for anyone considering making a change, this conversation is definitely for you. Hi Nikki, really excited to have you on my podcast. How are you?
Krutika, lovely to see you as well. Really happy to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Amazing. Now, I know we're recording this in the evening, and I know you've got a little one. So, assuming she's been put to bed and it wasn't too manic.
Fingers crossed she's down. If you hear screaming in the background, that's what that is. But in theory, she should be down very soon.
Amazing. Well, it's fine. We'll pause if we need to anyway, Nikki, so not a problem. In this conversation, we'll obviously be talking a little bit about your career trajectory and specifically your decision to leave one of the big four accountancy practices. We obviously met during our days working at Kaplan, where we both had a bit of a pivot into the education space. You know, that was several years ago, actually. And of course, since then, you've kind of moved on to work at one of the big accountancy practices. But can you just walk us through your corporate working journey?
So it began when I was at university, really, when we had to, for one of our management modules, look at potential careers and how we might get into it. I can't remember the exact module, but it was something along those lines. I started looking into internships. And my two choices at the end had been successful assessment centres for what was the FSA and also PwC at the time. And again, sort of thinking on that, stability, accounting sort of thing, went with the PwC one, and that was in corporate tax. So started as an intern, joined the graduate scheme. After about 3 or so years, I completed my ACA, decided that wasn't enough, wanted to do tax. So then put myself through the CTA as well, so the chartered tax exams, because one was not enough. After that, having completed that in corporate tax, I then moved across to VAT, of course, why wouldn't you? And then that's when I joined Kaplan for a year, just because I think I fancied something a bit different and the opportunity came up. I was really excited about teaching people about tax mainly. So when it turned out that I was put down to teach financial reporting and things that I'd only sort of seen in theory and in the textbooks, the opportunity for tax wasn't there. So then I sort of went back into VAT, where I was then for the next 10 or so years, just over a decade, and worked my way up to senior manager from there.
Wow, and it feels like, tax, I know, especially having studied it as well, it's definitely an interesting field. But VAT, what was it about VAT that got you going?
I think it made more sense, which probably sounds weird because I know lots of my corporate tax colleagues would sort of go, VAT is a bit strange, but someone does something for someone else, they get paid for it. To me, I really like the fact that you get to work out what goes on in the business, actually like what is actually happening, who's doing what for who, as opposed to sort of the corporate tax and personal tax that I saw, which was, I've done this over the past year, I'm adjusting profits, which seemed a bit more sort of abstract.
And 2 professional qualifications as well, not just ACA, you mentioned CTA as well. How was that experience? Because I feel like the CTA qualification is pretty intense from what I've heard.
I would say that both of them, they're both level 7 qualifications. They're both equivalent to a master's degree, which always makes me feel better that it was quite difficult. And it was interesting because my ACA, we were put through by the firm in our intake, our student intake. So hundreds of us going through, sitting in college for however many weeks it was, sitting the exams. Whereas when I did CTA, I was the only one doing it, and it was fitting it around work as well. So it's interesting that I saw both sides of it. So the juggling work and studying, and I was doing another qualification at the time as well, because, otherwise it's just too boring. So I was doing my fitness instructing as some like light relief, because that was a level 2 qualification. So it was fun to do the exams for that in comparison. So yeah, I had both of those. Both approaches came with their different challenges. But I think hopefully it made me more aware, when I had other students saying, I need to balance work and study, that I could say, well, this is what I've learned from both these approaches.
Nikki, you strike me as someone who always likes to be learning and doing things. And you mentioned you were doing this qualification. You've also got the fitness instructor course. I'm just intrigued, actually. What was that like?
So that was, I think, because I was studying, I was just going to the gym an awful lot. And it reached the point where one of the instructors said, why don't you get paid to be here? Because, if the instructor doesn't turn up, then, you can take the class. So that was really what started that off. But yeah, you just learn how to take an exercise class, so how to instruct it. So there's that physical element of it, getting your class together. How do you safely take participants through, as well as the theory of, a bit of anatomy and a bit of nutrition and those sorts of things to sort of support the main fitness experience. But yeah, it was good fun, really good fun.
And just circling back to your career, you got to a certain level, but you've recently left that all behind. Now, was that a daunting decision, reaching a certain point? And, I'm just thinking about even when I made a pivot from moving from practice to education and then within learning design. And now I'm working, for a professional accountancy body, for example. I feel like making those big decisions come with real fear. I kind of just want to understand, was it daunting for you taking that leap out of the professional working space to pursue something different and new?
Yes, 100%. So I think one of the things, and again, this is from my own experience, that made it particularly difficult is that I felt I'd worked so hard to get to that senior manager level. It had taken me years and years to get there. I felt I'd finally I think cracked it is maybe the wrong word, but I felt as though I knew what I was doing and I was doing well at that role. And I think actually part of it almost becomes your identity. So, when people say, what do? You say, the first thing you say is that what your job title is, who you work for. So it's not just a job, it becomes part of who you are. And I think that's part of what makes it difficult as well to say, okay, I don't do that anymore. Or, just when you meet people and saying, actually, no, I'm now self-employed or I'm freelance or I'm doing this, that, the other, there's a bit which goes, but yeah, I had this 20 years beforehand or however long it was, or I was doing this other stuff. And that was a big part of my life. And so I think that it is a big thing to just say, I'm not going to do that anymore, because you've got that sort of attachment and that feeling of achievement and accomplishment. And I think as well, the people in you mentioned earlier, your family might say, this is the path you're going on. And they're proud of you as well for, getting to where you've got. So in some sense, I suppose I felt a bit, you almost feel like you're letting people down a bit. So I don't think it's ever a kind of decision where you wake up and you go, you know what, this is going to be fine. It's 100%, there's always going to be those little bits of doubt, all these little fears that sort of feed in. I think it's looking at the bigger picture ultimately and going, okay, where am I now? What's not quite working? Is it something I can fix where I am? Or do I need to, as you say, pivot into something a bit different? But I wouldn't say it's an easy decision. And actually, I've had a lot of conversations, funnily enough, over the past couple of weeks with people who are thinking about it, but they're not sure. And there's that, they've been in their career for over a decade and they are reaching that point of kind of feel like I need to do something else, but I don't want to throw things away. I don't want to feel like I've worked all that time and I'm just going to go, nah. But then if we think about it in the context of our whole career, I won't give away my age, I'll let everyone guess. But let's say, for argument's sake, if I was, say, mid-30s, you could say, well, I've worked for nearly 2 decades, but actually if I don't retire till I'm 68, maybe that will get later and later, I might actually have over 30 years left of working. And when you look at it from that perspective, actually, maybe it doesn't seem like such a crazy thing to use some of the stuff that you've got and that you've built up over that time, but just use it in a slightly different way, or use it to just turn the corner onto something a bit different.
Yeah, that's so well put, especially that piece that you drew on earlier about identity and how what we do ends up becoming our identity, and it's almost becoming aware whether you're doing that. And it's interesting because when I had a conversation with one of my friends for a previous episode, we spoke about introductions and how a lot of times when we do introduce ourselves, just like you said, Nikki, we default to, oh, hi, I'm so and so, I'm an accountant, and you put so much emphasis on what it is that you do in your professional life. Now, Nikki, you've obviously gone on to venture into becoming your own business owner. How has that transition been like for you? And have there been any challenges that you've faced with the decision that you've made?
So I guess over time, I've had little bits of self-employment alongside employment. So it wasn't a completely new idea, but I think it's a complete shift in mindset when it becomes your main thing, your full-time role. Trying to put it into words there, how that mindset shifts. I mean, I couldn't turn off my computer and just go, okay, I've done my work. It's thinking, okay, well, I might have done my work for today, but where's the next bit coming from? A challenge as well, I suppose, if you're in an established organisation. I was in a VAT team. We did VAT work. I was working with directors and partners. We had a pipeline. I was well versed in what we do to go and help clients, how we can win work. Whereas when you're by yourself, it's like, oh, my product is suddenly very different. It's me that I'm selling. And it's, I think one of the main challenges is now you are the product and you're putting yourself out there a bit more. I mean, one example, anyone who is connected with me on LinkedIn will know that for the past few years, I haven't retouched it. I'll be honest. I think when it first came out, I added a few people. But then more recently, I'm thinking, well, actually, this is how I tell people what I'm doing now and how I connect. And actually, it's been really lovely. I know, for example, that we hadn't spoken in quite a long time, but I used the self-employment as an excuse to reach out to people again. People have had some very kind things to say, and people have been very kind in sharing their contacts as well, putting me in touch with their wider network. So I think, to your point around challenges, it was going, okay, right, I've never really done this properly before. It's time to give it a go.
And that point about having to make you are the product. That's what you said, right? You end up being the product, and it can be quite scary putting yourself out there. All of that does take a bit of courage and really stepping out of your comfort zone. Now, actually, I haven't touched on this, but I'll ask you, do you want to share what it is that you're doing for your own business?
So I think I've probably taken the bits that I enjoyed about my job and I'm sort of doing it in a more portfolio-based way, let's call it that. Taking some of the tax technical out of there, taking some of the training and the coaching, and then tagging on a bit of recruitment as well. So still quite focused on the tax profession and the tax professionals, but again, trying to use what I've learned over that time, the things I really enjoy doing, by helping people, learning about their careers, seeing them develop, and just doing it from an external perspective. I think I really enjoy, because I don't have to worry about the politics within an organisation. I don't have a particular agenda or anything like that. I can just be completely independent and give people a bit of outside perspective as well.
Earlier at the beginning of the conversation, I know we referenced your little daughter. So you're a mum to a toddler. How do you juggle the responsibilities of being a parent and managing your own business and all that you're doing right now?
It's a good question. And actually, it's quite an apt one, because I think when I was preparing for this, I thought, well, as long as she's okay and she's in nursery, it's kind of okay, because then I know for those hours I can get my head down and work. And generally, luckily, she's been in good health and all that stuff. However, as I was reminded this week, so she was off just for a day with a poorly arm, but you just realise that when something like that happens, you have no control over when it happens. You just have to kind of work around it. So, for example, how did I deal with that? I knew she was going to be off nursery, so I woke up at 5 o'clock and tried to do a couple of hours work before she woke up. And then I was working later to try and again get on top of things as much as I could. You know, you wait ages for an email, and then of course a load of them came on that one day. So I think sometimes it's, you know, when you've got that support and you know that she's well looked after and things like that during the week, I can just get my head down and it doesn't feel as challenging. But it's when that doesn't quite work, when you need the backup. I mean, I do my best to keep the weekend completely free to spend time with her, because yeah, that's the reason I had her. It's to spend time with her, not to work full time, but it's trying to get that balance.
And I think that's quite a hard balance, isn't it? Because, you know, often people think that the idea of being your own business or business owner might bring with it that flexibility. And yes, that flexibility is great. But like you say, you can't predict what's going to come into your inbox on any given day. It's not like a paid job, a salaried job where you know what your responsibilities, tasks are. You're working a certain number of hours during that day. Now, I imagine that with your own business, there's probably a lot of motivation that you might need to, I guess, keep going, especially during the early days when it can be a little bit more of a challenge trying to get the clients or to win that additional piece of work. So, what is it that gets you out of bed in the morning? What is it that keeps you motivated when things aren't going to plan?
There have definitely been some days that, so for just context as well, I'm still within my first sort of 6 months of getting everything started from pretty much ground zero at the start. I think there have definitely been days where you sort of go, why am I doing this again? Why did I decide to, you know, start this? And I think one thing that helps me is, and this is maybe a bit strange, but I keep a diary. So I've kept one since 1998, pretty much every single day. The thing that really helps me, those low days where I'm like, why did I do this? This is really tough. You know, maybe I've had a conversation that hasn't ended the way that I'd hoped, in terms of having a new coaching client or a new tutee or having one of my training sessions, except, you know, whatever it might be, is then looking back at those diaries. So I make sure to write every day. I'll also look back at the year before. And I know some people may not agree with the approach because they say, well, you don't want to live in the past. But I try to use it as something which moves me forward. So if I look, for example, back at last year, I could see that there were some things that weren't quite right, weren't quite in balance, and that weren't making me completely happy. And when I look back at that now and look at where I am, I can see the progress. And it's having a bit of that perspective as well, because I think it's so easy, you know, 1 week goes into a month, goes into a year, goes into a decade, and sometimes you can just lose a bit of the perspective of, actually, this was really hard, I got through that, or I was in this place and actually I did something about that, and this is where I am now. So I find it really helpful to get that that perspective. And I think also just, you know, I wake up and I want to start working because I'm like, oh, I'm really excited and curious to sort of see what happens as well. So I'm like, oh, maybe this will happen. It might not, but I still wake up with that excitement, like, oh, I wonder what today is going to bring.
So 1998, you've kept a diary since then. That in itself is an impressive achievement. And the fact that you've put it so well, that perspective piece, you know, looking back and reflecting. And I don't think enough people do that. I feel like I don't do that enough. And I wish I'd kept a diary for all those years. It's only over the last year or so that I'm trying to journal a little bit more. I don't do it every day, but I keep hearing about the benefits of it. And it feels like that the act of journaling and putting your thoughts down can really help bring that perspective. So I think that's a great little tip that you added there in terms of thinking about what your motivations are for the decisions that you've ultimately made. Also, that piece about the excitement and curiosity for being in the driver's seat, right? So often we find ourselves in situations where we feel like we don't have control. And control is one of those things that as humans we feel like we need. I can almost think about certain situations, whether it's professionally or personally, where when I don't have that control, I almost start feeling anxious. And, it's not a great feeling. But thinking about your transition from being an employee to an entrepreneur, have there been any resources or mentors to help you navigate this new space that you're in?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say those people have been absolutely amazing. So there have been people who've done a similar thing in going from sort of corporate into coaching. So it's been amazing to hear their insights, especially talking about qualifications, and the sort of ins and outs of it. So I sort of had an idea, but I think until you speak to people who've done it, you don't really get the whole picture. I've had a wonderful coach and mentor as well. I can't even remember how our paths crossed on LinkedIn, but we just started chatting and he's been amazing. Also, my colleagues who I've worked with. So I am self-employed freelance, but I work with people on various projects. So again, their support, their guidance has been fundamental to keeping me going. And of course, family, friends who have been there to support the decision in the first place, because I don't think I could have, said, oh yeah, by the way, I'm going to do this now if I didn't have the support of, close family and friends telling me, you can do this. Because I think, again, you mentioned, what do you do when you're struggling a bit for motivation or it feels a bit much or a bit overwhelming? Even a few kind words like that can just be that little bit of fuel that you need to go, okay, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. I just haven't got there yet. A lot of the connections I've made as well, someone going, oh, you might want to speak to this person. So I think, again, it's, if I'd have just been in a silo, sat in front of my laptop by myself, I would not have moved as far forward as I have thus far.
And it's just about taking that step to reach out and ask for help as well. And so often we, in our heads, think, oh, maybe that person's too busy. Will they help me? Will they not? And instead of dilly-dallying in our minds about will they, won't they, it's better that we just ask. And more often than not, people do want to help and they will help. So it's great that you've reached out. And you mentioned earlier as well, you were having to step out of your comfort zone and post a bit more, connect with connections on LinkedIn. And those are all small incremental steps that do all add up.
Just you reminded me as well that it's, I think, coming into it with a mindset of wanting to learn and being open to things as well. That I think because if I'd have done this, I don't know how many years ago, my mindset was completely different. And I think it would have taken a very different trajectory, but it's almost putting myself back to being a new grad again and going, okay, I'm going to pretend that I don't really, let's say I don't really know the ropes that well. I'm just going to ask all the questions, even if they're silly questions, and try and find out as much as I can. And so having that kind of mindset rather than going in and going, well, I'm an experienced senior manager, so I should be able to do everything. Because I don't think that would help me either. It's having that, asking the questions, being open, trying to take on as much information, learn as much as possible.
Yeah, that curiosity is key, isn't it? And not feeling like any question is too stupid to ask, because often we might feel, oh, I don't want to ask that question. What are they going to think of me? And it's also stepping out of that in your own head as a little barrier. Now, you mentioned you've done ACA and you've also done the CTA, and those qualifications do teach you a lot of essential business acumen. I'm just thinking there must be additional skills and knowledge that you've had to pick up now that you're your own business owner. So what might those skills and knowledge be that you've picked up along the way?
I think I've had to revisit accounting. I'll hold my hands up and, taxation of unincorporated businesses. I've dusted off those to get back into the detail to make sure I don't miss anything, because it has been a long time. I think the main one has been trying to be organised. And I'll say trying because you can always make a plan, but then things happen. So the plan doesn't always work out. There have been hiccups along the way trying to do that. But I think that's probably the main thing. I don't have a team to rely on. Everything, all the admin, the billing, it all comes down to me. So it's trying to, I guess, make the most of the resource I have available, which is just one person.
Yes, and I can imagine that being a challenge, just trying to organise your calendar, organise the admin, like you say, but also organise your personal life, Nikki. I'm sure you're having to do a bit of that with your little one. So, definitely skills I can imagine you're picking up along the way. Now, just to wrap up, what one piece of advice would you give to someone who's feeling a little bit stuck? Maybe they want to take that step, pursue a change, do something different, but they're just not able to. What would you say to give them that little push to make that move?
So I think the first thing to say is, if you've got a gut feeling that something somewhere isn't quite right, don't ignore it. It might not be immediately obvious as to what that is. So I think writing it down in whatever way that works for you, get it all down. And then if you do that on a regular enough basis, can you see any patterns that correlate with how you're feeling? And is there something that you can find? Because what I'm not saying is, if you're not quite sure about your job, just leave, do something completely different. That's not the message. If you feel something's not right, try and work out what it is. Try and get some perspective as well so if maybe writing, journaling isn't your thing, chat to people about it. People who maybe aren't directly involved, to gain that additional perspective as well. See if you can use that to sort of pinpoint what it might be. And then once you find out what that is, make a plan. It could be that you just need to change a client account you're working on. It could be that there's a particular person in your team that you can talk to about how you might work better. It doesn't have to be a massive, massive thing, but I would just say try and get to the root of what it is that's causing that.
It comes back to, I know some of the stuff you were mentioning earlier, but it seems so important. Introspection, reflection, taking a moment to sort of pause rather than being reactive to a situation, figuring out what is it that's making you feel a certain way. And if it is something that's quite a prolonged thing that's niggling away at you, then there is something and to act on it. So that's some great advice. Now, with all my guests, I ask one final question, and that is, what journey are you on right now?
So I would say the journey I'm on is to get myself to an established business. So as I mentioned before, I'm in my first 6 months. So it's on that journey to build up a good reputation, to build up the business and just see where it sort of takes me.
And that sounds like a great journey to be on, and loads of exciting things to come. I will link in the show notes details around your business, so anyone that's curious and interested in learning about Nikki and what she has to offer, you can click on the link in the show notes. But thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.
Thank you again for listening to me jabbering on. It's been lovely.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Journeys with Krutika. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and share. I'd love for you to hit the follow button wherever you get your podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you have a journey that you want to share, email me at journeyswithkrutika@gmail.com or reach out via my socials. I'm on Instagram and TikTok. Just search Journeys with Krutika, because your journey is extraordinary.